Libby. Wait, you're not Libby. Hey, Hermione, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. We are lucky enough to have a guest co-host today. Hermione, how about you let folks know how you connected at Technical?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Very exciting to be on. So I'm working with EdTechnical, supporting on a few special projects, in my capacity as AI and EdTech lead at Purposeful Ventures, which is an incubator here in the UK. But my background is actually in government, spent several years in number 10 Downing Street advising prime ministers on education policy
What's it
worlds.
like did you actually get to go into number 10 Downing Street? I hear it's like kind of like a really big apartment. Like, what's it like?
Yeah, you go in the front door every day, and it's kind of like a big house,
Wow.
with rooms that are being converted into not very fit for purpose offices. But it's kind of neat because it means you have everyone in one place, to create a real hive mind,
Nice.
around the prime minister and his
Did
team.
you ever meet the cat that's out front Downing Street? Yeah.
Larry the cat.
Is that real?
Yeah, yeah, it's real. He's always running around. I mean, I think he's pretty
Yeah.
old now, so there's definite kind of Larry watch around. He's probably the most like revered um object animal
In the
in the
Cool. And so
building.
today we are talking to an MP, right? A minister. You need to walk me through the titles here in the UK government, since you're the expert here.
So MPs, members
Okay.
of Parliament, uh, who come from different parties, sit in the House of Commons, and the party with the most MPs forms the government, and the leader of that party becomes the Prime Minister. He appoints a cabinet, which is made up of secretaries of state. So, in the Department for Education, for instance, you have a Secretary of State for
Hmm.
Education, and she has beneath her ministers to support her work.
This is kind of like Schoolhouse
So, a
Rock.
Minister
I'm
of
getting like a
State.
crash course in the structure of UK government.
So, we are talking to Minister Olivia Bailey. She's a junior minister in the department, and she's responsible for quite a wide portfolio of things, including early years, some of the government's work on school food, but also, and why we're so excited to speak to her, data, digital tech, and AI in education.
Cool. And so she's the minister who's been given this portfolio of some of the tasks that fall under the UK Department for
Right,
Education. Is that right? Great.
exactly. So she's working with civil servants to drive
And
that through.
what specifically are you hoping to talk to them?
Right, so we're talking to her about their AI Tutoring Pioneers program. So the department launched a tender so they can get bids in from private companies to develop a kind of standard, for AI tutors of the future. And their whole kind of rationale was they don't see anything on the market yet that's like really fit for purpose, that's really focused on outcomes. So they want to work with schools and with the market to develop a standard. Is
Well, that's
really the
pretty because I
case.
mean, I think literally in the States, we're actually literally in the process of dismantling the Department for Education, our equivalent here. So it's pretty interesting to see the exact opposite trajectory. But I'm excited to talk to her, and so like let's jump in.
Let's do it. Today with Minister Olivia Bailey from the Department for Education here in the UK to talk about the government's AI Tutoring Tools Pioneer programme, for which she's the responsible minister. Thank you so much for joining us. To get us started, we'd just love to hear a bit more about your background and what makes you particularly interested in AI for education.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on your podcast today. I suppose several reasons. I've worked in public policy all my life, in kind of policy development across social policy, across domestic policy, whether that was for the Labour Party, for Keir Starmer when he was leader of the opposition, or for various think tanks, and also in public opinion research. So I've always been very interested in how we can improve public services for people. And I think AI gives us such an amazing and exciting opportunity to do that. So I've always been interested in it from a kind of policy perspective, but also as a parent too, with young children who are, at the front of this, new explosion of AI and the potential that it brings and the challenges that it brings in education and just in their young lives. I think I'm also very interested in it from that perspective too. And it's one of the reasons why in this job that, it's such a brilliant job that I have the ability to kind of look at and shape how we are engaging in tech in an educational context. It's one of the reasons why I'm really keen that we don't vacate the pitch, but actually increase our presence on the pitch in this space. Because, I often reflect on seeing, press releases from Conservative Party politicians or whatever it may be, saying, what we need is a return to pen and paper in schools. And I just think it's so far removed from where we need to be, which is this is happening. Children are using these technologies all the time, teachers are using these technologies all the time. Instead of kind of putting our fingers in our ears and closing our eyes and saying, well, we must return to pen and paper in schools, we've got to be really actively engaged in how we shape that, how we keep children safe, fundamentally, first and foremost. That's what underlines everything. But also how we make sure that children get the opportunities and the huge pedagogical benefits that can come from all of this. So that's what we're doing in the DFE, and I'm looking forward to talking about it more today.
So thank you very much for that. We're really keen to get into more of the detail, but first it'd be great if you could just give us a bit of an overview of what it is that the DFE is doing with this AI tutoring program.
Yeah, look, so let me just talk you through what we're doing with the tutoring program, and then more broadly as well, as if I may. So we have announced that we're going to be working with industry to create AI tutoring tools through a test and learn approach, which we want to see rolled out into schools by the end of 2027. We're hoping to announce, and I think by the time you're airing, we will have announced who we're going to be working with to do that. And it's going to be a test and learn approach where we ask these companies to work with schools to look at how we can get really great pedagogical benefits for children in the classroom or through their homework, to get many of the benefits that you might expect to see through a kind of personal tutor that somebody you might pay for, but in that kind of embedded into the classroom and into the homework context, to give children the many benefits that come from that kind of constructive challenge. The kind of engagement that we know AI is able to do, but needs a lot of shaping to make sure it's actually useful for cognitive development and for children's learning. So that's the AI tutoring tool, which is really, really exciting. One of the government's big bets for how we can use AI in our public services. But also more broadly, if I can just say, we're doing a lot more on AI too. So we're obviously developing our content store, which we want different models and EdTech companies to be drawing on, so that we've got really great content that AI tools can use. We've got our AI Youth Advisory Board to make sure that children's voices are embedded as we do all of this work. We've got a range of work. Safety, which is absolutely critical, and in earlier this year we announced some world-leading safety standards on AI to reduce the risk of children becoming perhaps emotionally dependent on AI services, to reduce the risk of damaging cognitive development. So there's a load of different things in our package of safety standards, and in the autumn we're also going to be consulting on safety certification for AI in schools as well. So there's a kind of broad package of stuff that we're doing, and of course all of this work on AI sits in a wider context of what we're doing in technology in schools more broadly. I mean, I've just said in my opening answer, it's really important the government's really on the pitch in this, and that's why we're doing it. So through our EdTech test beds, our research program, we're looking at how we can support schools to navigate the EdTech environment, to make sure that the tools that they're using in their schools really help children's learning, are of the best possible quality. And we're looking at a load of work that we're doing in that space. We're digitizing the curriculum, and we're supporting teachers with digital skills. And of course, we're also stepping in on the important questions of screen time. So both in and out of school, how much screen time is too much screen time, what screen time can be useful for learning, etc., etc. So across the board, as a government, we recognise the huge benefits and opportunities that come with embracing educational technology, but we're also starting from a perspective of making sure every child is safe.
Minister Bailey is part of this is like the federal government, the National Department of Education is doing a lot of this, which is in stark contrast to what you see at least going on in the States, where it's like kind of pretty much a Wild West, and it's really left up to kind of sub-regional governments. So just to play this back to you, you guys are doing lots of stuff. I get the safety standards and the research, and that makes a lot of sense and sounds in some ways quite what might be expected from a Department for Education. But the first bit you're talking about, just to pull this out, folks, you guys are kind of trying to work with different industry and nonprofits to kind of help design or guide the design of AI supporting learning tools. That's part of the initiative, right? Because I just want to pull that out. That's obviously
Yeah.
quite clear to you because this is your job. I think to some of our listeners, that's like a pretty new and innovative idea.
Absolutely, and that is exactly what we're doing. And these industries who have bid to kind of work with us on this are working in partnership with schools. As I said, it's a test and learn approach, so they're going to be kind of co-designing, working with us, working with the schools. To get products that work, and obviously we hope and expect that those products will become very successful, and then we of course want to see them rolled out more widely in schools.
That's the exciting bit, I guess, is how we go from this test and learn approach to more pupils and indeed teachers having access to these tools. So I wondered if, as you look sort of 5 to 10 years out, do you have an emerging vision for what the role of the government will be versus the role of the market, or are you going to be led by what you discover on this first phase of the journey?
Look, I think it is important that we are led by what we discover, because any good proper process of test and learn doesn't start with its end point. We have to make sure that we get this right. We have to make sure that it works. We have to make sure that there's educational benefits for children, and it's something that we want to see more broadly. Now, obviously, we know from the evidence that some of the things that you get from a kind of personalised tutor, for example, can bring huge benefits in terms of your learning and how much further ahead it can get you in terms of at school. So we want to try and take that and see how we can use those benefits in this context of creating these AI empowered tools that can support children to get those benefits, whether it's in the classroom or when they're doing their homework. And I think that it is important that government steps in here and helps shape that, because what we wouldn't want to see is, as I said, half the teachers are already using AI. Children are using it. And if we're not careful, without stepping in, without trying to be active and to shape what's going on, you kind of have parallel universes going on where you have these things are operating outside of an educational context. And I think it's our job to bring them together, to make sure that we've got getting tools that are genuinely supporting and enhancing children's learning experience, and not potentially what you might see if you're not involved, which is actually you don't want tools which might restrict children's cognitive development because perhaps they're just getting given the answer. You need to be able to have the constructive challenge that comes in a classroom in some of these tools to make them really, really useful.
I think that's something we have seen a lot emerging from some of the initial literature and some of the studies on this, is the cognitive science suggesting that a kid getting unstuck and the way that generalized chatbots can help with that can actually be in tension with building durable knowledge through productive struggle. So as you kind of alluded to there, is that something that you're hoping that the program is going to kind of dig into and help us learn more about, so that tools can be designed more effectively?
No, definitely, because that's our starting point really, and I can't stress enough how different what we are hoping to develop here is from like a generalized chatbot, which perhaps would just give you the answer. That's not helpful. It's not helpful to be given the answer. You need to know why you don't understand what the answer is. You need to get the challenge, you need to have the engagement, and well-designed models can, I think, support children, whether in the classroom or at home, and support teachers to make sure that their children are getting that really good understanding and challenge that they need.
Cool. Just a follow-up question on
Owen,
that.
did you have any more on that?
I'm sure that there's a lot more subtlety here. It's a pretty sophisticated program being designed, but the tagline sometimes people hear is like, hey, we're trying to have the government help make like AI tutors better. Might be like kind of the oversimplified tagline. And I guess I just wanted to ask a bit about AI tutors, because my understanding is that you guys are, one of your priorities is to make sure that this is also really integrated into the school day or school practice. And at least historically, when you think of a tutor is sort of a one-on-one interaction. It usually happens, unless that's all you're getting. Usually that happens like after school hours. It's kind of supplementary. It's, hey, let's work on the specific challenge you have. And sometimes that might be a little bit different than what's happening on during the school day. And I was just wondering how and some people would argue it's precisely that kind of, hey, I'm going to help you with whatever you need right now, is part of what makes at least a one-on-one tutoring model effective. There's also but there's another model that's where like, hey, this is like a learning support system that, in a busy classroom will help triage a question that the teacher can't get to the student, and this is like kind of a supporter on the side. And I was just wondering kind of how you might be thinking about that trade-off of kind of part of what makes a tutor compelling is it sort of does what the student wants, obviously in a pedagogically beneficial way, but it kind of like it is very personalized, whatever the student
Tailored to their learning.
Yeah. Whereas but if you disconnect it from what's happening in the classroom, then, maybe the kid learns a ton about a subject, but not the subject they needed to be studying in class. And I was just wondering if you guys were thinking about that tension at all.
Yes, absolutely. And it's kind of exactly what we're looking to explore through the pioneers and through the test and learn approach to kind of tease out all of these questions and to get it right in the model that we create. I think the best way I would describe it is, we know what the benefits are. We can see the educational benefits of a one-on-one tutor. And I suppose the essay question is, how do you get those benefits into AI-enabled tools to support children to get those benefits, right? So, that I envisage that being that could be in classroom contexts, that could be in homework contexts, it could be in a number of different ways. But it would be not right to say that we're just looking at kind of replicating that tutor experience into an AI version of that tutor experience. We want to embed this fundamentally into supporting teachers to teach and to support the overall learning experience that the child has.
And on that point, I think we start to see different models of AI tutoring emerge. One that is pupil facing, one that might be described as more a co-pilot for the tutor or the teacher themselves. And so as part of the program, do you expect to see a kind of range of tools being developed and tested? So some that might not even sit in front of the pupil, some that definitely will, or are you envisaging them all being pupil facing but having a teacher facing element?
I think it's important that we have as many ideas as possible, and there's lots of different ways of looking at this as possible. And I don't think it'd be right for me to predetermine exactly what these tools should be. I suppose we're starting from the principles of we think there's a potential benefit here for children's learning to support teachers. We want to work with industry to explore how we can do that safely and effectively.
And you talked a little bit there about the kind of evidence of human tutoring and how effective that can be, but a lot of that is predicated on the human tutoring literature, and we know much less about how that replicates in an AI driven world. So we wanted to hear from you a bit about what you think success looks like, how you're going to think about measuring that. Obviously, the specifics will emerge throughout the program, but when you think about impact for students, impact for teachers, what that might look like and how that gets picked up in the program.
Yeah, and I think that is, that's absolutely why the way that you've characterised that there is exactly why we're doing the test and learn approach, to make sure that we get this right. But we are going to be collecting data on outcomes, on workload, on accessibility, safety, impact on disadvantaged pupils, and we will be publishing what we learn. And I think it's important that we do have that transparency. I think that's really important so that everybody can learn from the process that we're adopting here. And I just really want to emphasise that we are being led by the evidence. We want to make sure that what we're developing really works, and we'll be doing everything we can to demonstrate that and to test that.
I said, just on a related question, I think this is, I just think it's really awesome that this is happening. I'm really excited that, the government of the UK is backing this type of experimentation. And, there is a failure risk, which is just, that can always be difficult. So it's really awesome that you guys are kind of keeping an open mind, because I think that these, the design challenges of getting these to actually work in like real classrooms are numerous, and they're hard to tell all of them ahead of time. I guess there's one camp of, I suspect the answer is going to be like you guys are going to figure out. So I'm not asking you to determine, but just maybe you to riff with us on this. The idea of that there's just one notion of, hey, we're going to have like an open source model. Like we're going to sink all our resources in developing like a cool, better LLM that in some way is better for learning, supposedly. And then everyone can use that. And in some ways, like that's one model of like, a very clear publicly owned resource that everyone uses. In my opinion, a lot of the time, like the last mile of really effective learning experiences is this like kind of detailed customization, really understanding the learning environment where inevitably you're probably going to need some other type of software layer to make it like really integrate with the teacher's workflow or really like address the specific challenges of students. And I was just wondering, like, kind of higher level, how you're thinking about backing something that's completely open source versus like funding something that like that implementation might be extremely successful, but it might only work in this context. And so then you can pull the learning of that and be like, how might we come up with another version of that more narrow use case in other settings? Does that make sense? Like kind of the backing something that might be a fairly more narrowly scoped but better designed learning intervention versus something that's like kind of more of a base level, hey, everyone come and use it.
I think so. It's a really interesting question, and I think you know what I'm going to say, which is that we're deliberately doing this in the way that we're doing it because we need to understand we've got the different pioneers that we're working with to try different approaches to work in partnership with schools and to co-design things that work. And I think that's the thing that we know at this point in time. And then the other thing that we know is that if it works and we find something that works, we know that we're going to want to scale it. But you know, beyond that, I suppose the approach that we're taking across the board in our approach to AI and tech in schools is to try and create that kind of open access, across the board approach to standards. You know, our content store, for example, is a really good example of how we want to pull together stuff that can be really useful to make sure there's good quality stuff that's feeding the models. You know, all of the standards work that we're doing across the board. So, you know, all of this stuff needs to be both work in a specific school and be very place specific, but then there are also obviously things that we can do kind of across the country to support adoption.
The program is designed very explicitly, certainly in this phase, to be supporting disadvantaged children, and that's the framing you've given it. Are there I'm very interested generally in the approach you've taken in terms of government taking on the role of building some of the inputs. You've talked about the content store, Oak's doing a lot of work on a digital curriculum, I think. There's the benchmarks that are going to be built from teacher interactions, all like really exciting in terms of, you know, what government can provide to help technologists fine tune and develop their tools. But I wonder if are there things that are particular to that disadvantaged children lens that will be picked up in some of that work? Will there be particular benchmarks, or are you seeing these more as kind of generalist benchmarks, and then you'll see how they apply to the target cohort currently?
Yeah, I mean, these are things that we're committed to looking at, to measuring, to reporting on. I think that the reason for the kind of framing is because if you think about the benefits that a one-on-one tutor, that often is something which, you know, a parent can maybe afford to pay for, can bring, and the evidence that can significantly boost your educational experience, I think that we are starting from the perspective of how do we get those benefits for everybody, and how do we embed them throughout the curriculum to support teachers to do that for every child in the class, not just the children whose parents can afford the extra tuition. So I think that's a really good starting question. That's why we're talking about disadvantage, but we're going to be measuring that too as part of the process. Yeah.
I was looking back at the program specifications, and I think you have a really interesting partnership model that you're developing, because you've specified that you either need to have got lots of experience like deploying EdTech companies, or you need to have experience with an AI lab, and your partnership needs to bring the other lens. And I thought that was really interesting in context, in the context that we sometimes see a bit of a tension between the instincts of particularly AI technologists who are kind of optimizing for model performance, possibly for engagement, and educationalists who are thinking more about relationships, curriculum fidelity, things like that. And so I wondered, I assume that was a deliberate design choice, and how you see this program kind of bringing those two halves together, and how that's an important part of designing education specific AI tools.
Yeah, and I think that's where the kind of co-design approach that we're taking is just so important. We don't want edtech companies and AI labs to build something and then hand it to schools. We want them to build it with schools from the start. That's really, really important. Um, you've mentioned all of the other activity that we're driving at the moment on digital curriculum and open data standards. We want to make sure that everything is grounded in the curriculum from day one. That's really important. So I suppose really my answer would be we were trying to pull together all of the instincts of everybody into creating something that really works for every child.
So playing a kind of coordinating role, bringing those different people around the table, and keeping focused on
One lightning round question before we move to the closing. I was wondering how you think about a kind of comparing this to the United States, where there's a lot less of this going on. There's one sense where it's like a government can be procuring the exact solution they think is best, and maybe that they're best placed to coordinate that. The other is kind of setting like a minimum accessible, like acceptable threshold. So like I'm personally really interested in stuff like high quality open educational resources, where the sense is like, hey, we're gonna do a pretty good job and make it like free and open to everyone. And then, hey, if you have some innovative new idea that can like even do better than that, that's great. But there's kind of this, the real mechanism is floor setting rather than procuring the exact solution. And I mean, again, I think you're open to this, but in general, how much of you guys are thinking about this? Like, hey, the key is that we have a pretty good solution that's like freely available to all pupils versus like, hey, this is the way to get to the like almost perfect solution.
Well, I suppose I'm instinctively want to respond to your question in the round because I think on safety we need a really clear high floor, because that is there should just be safety standards should be met, full stop, end of story. We've got good safety standards. We continue to make sure that they're as good as they can be, and we're continuing to support schools to make sure that children are safe in using these technologies. I think we are also stepping in on quality, educational impact, what's the benefits of screen time for children. We're going to be pushing forward with our kind of guidelines on that through the research that we're doing. So again, that's about centrally set expectations about what is good ed tech to be using in the classroom of a child. Why are you using it? We shouldn't be in a situation of a screen for the sake of a screen. We should be using screens when we know that they're going to contribute to learning. And so we're very much stepping in on that. But I suppose with the AI tutoring program, we think that we identify that unless we step in to say, come on, guys, let's pull this together and make sure that we're getting something which has the pedagogical impact and that utilizes technology, our fear was that we would have two distinct things going off in different directions. And actually, our role should be to step in and to force that collaboration, that cooperation, so that we get the best possible outcomes for children. So, we are willing to be adaptive to how we deal with technology in schools, but I think it all starts from the principle that we want children to get the benefits of educational technology. We want children to get the huge benefits that AI and tech bring. We don't think that the answer to that is to cover our eyes, to call for a return to pen and paper in schools. We think the answer to that is to step forward and to just be active and saying what good looks like, what safe looks like, and also helping shape the market so that we get really good quality products into schools.
So what do you think is most commonly misunderstood about this program, even among people who follow education policy closely?
Well, I think it's just the idea that it's like, I think a lot of people's conception of AI is like the chatbot that they may interact with on their phone, and that they may think that what we're trying to do is just another one of those into schools. That's not what we're doing. This is something that's fundamentally different, that's really looking for what the benefits of the tutoring programs that we've talked about, and then really looking at ways that we can embed them into the whole learning experience, whether that's in the classroom or at home. And so I suppose that's one big thing I'd say.
Is there a view that you yourself hold about AI in education that might surprise our audience, or that perhaps is slightly different from how government usually talks about this?
Well, I don't know. I think that I would probably return to what I've said, which is, I think this can be a very polarized debate sometimes. I think you can sometimes find yourself in a kind of space of this is a big and scary world, and therefore we must return to pen and paper in schools. And then you can find yourself in a kind of adopt at all costs space. And I think it's really important that we talk about the sensible middle ground, which is where we need to be, which is how you keep children safe whilst getting the benefits of technology. And so I'm really keen, and the government's really keen, to make sure that we're in that space and being really active to support schools, to keep children safe, but to get the huge benefits that clearly technology can bring for children's learning.
Great. And just last question. So we did earlier this year, we did a forecasting competition across different questions, asking people to look back and kind of make predictions about what education and AI might look like in 2028. And so we're going to draft you in as one of our contestants. Basically, if it's in 2028, and like, what do you think would have to have happened for you to feel like this program's gone well? Like, what would be some signs of that?
Well, yeah, look, I think the first thing is young people's engagement is really important. So I'm pleased that we've got our AI Youth Advisory Board, and I think that we want to make sure young people are shaping what is happening. I think the second thing is that we are reflecting on the fact that AI and EdTech is really embedded in how children are learning, rather than something which is discussed as separate or distinct. That, you know, it's something which children are able to utilize and use as they drive towards improving their knowledge, not something which we're just talking about as the kind of, there's a fear of cheating because they can go and often ask a chatbot the answer to the question. They need to be integrated and together. So that's the other thing that I would hope to see in 2028. Of course, hopefully having seen a successful test and learn process with our AI pioneers, and some of those models rolled out in schools across the country.
Great. Thank you so much for the time.
Super duper.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Lovely to
really
chat
great
to you.
to chat.
Yeah.
Super interesting interview. I've never spoken to a minister before. Hopefully I didn't embarrass you at all, Hermione.
Not at all. How did you find it?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was great. I mean, I think I was expecting, like, obviously they're in government, and so like they're not going to be quite as freewheeling maybe as some of our other guests, but it was pretty interesting to figure it out, And like I said, I just think it's like pretty encouraging that the government thinks they have a role to play here, but it didn't seem too like heavy-handed. The minister kept on like kind of making references, like some people are advocating to return to pens and paper, and like, she thought that was a bit like, kind of naive, that it's out of the box. Is there kind of an ongoing debate in the UK or some of the neighboring countries that might like add a bit more color to that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we've seen in Sweden, they've started to move back towards a books-based approach away from screen time. And there's a very live debate in the UK right now, which somewhat falls down political lines around, do we want kids using screens, the role of EdTech in the classroom, and in fact, should we be going back to pen and paper? And it's linked to, debate around social media and should there even be screens in classrooms?
UK kind of announced a potential social media ban, right? So that's all, these things are all kind of getting like mixed in. It's like social media, Gen AI, screen time. That's really interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But the current government said that they're going to initiate an Australia-style ban for kids under 16 in the UK. But then the current government is like, hey, we also want to try to hopefully develop like an effective, responsible AI tutor. So that's like kind of interesting. That's not just a knee-jerk. That's interesting, yeah.
And maybe there's some tension, but it also comes to, what spaces do they envisage kids using these kinds of tools, like home versus classroom, like how accessed, all of those questions. So, there could be a coherent way of joining this all.
It seemed, at least the spirit of the program was very much kind of experimentation, learning what would work, trying to build this collaboratively. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that was definitely one of my takeaways too. And I think testing and learning, not just in terms of what works in a pedagogical sense, which she did talk about a bit, but also like types of tools. We kind of posed the question around, is this just around the kind of traditional AI tutor chatbot, or are you envisaging a wider range? And she seemed very open that they are not prescribing a particular way of doing this. Although interestingly, she was kind of definitive that they are not just talking about a like generalized chatbot when it comes to tutors.
Yeah.
And she started to talk about ways in which that might not be what gets you the best educational outcomes. So it seemed like a mix, genuine test and learn, but with some quite strongly held beliefs already about what it is that fits what we know about
Yeah,
good
like
pedagogy.
really trying to be like intentional design.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because I do think they're just kind of, I spend a lot of time thinking about different ways of designing these types of learning tools, and like it's a really different design challenge if you're imagining an experience that's predominantly one-on-one, what we might assume a form of an AI tutor. You know, there's a question about how well you can pull that off. Maybe I'm a bit more optimistic, but like I think that could be a really powerful learning experience. But all the design decisions that go into that are like really different than if you're trying to be like something that kids use during class, right? It's just like a very different design space, and so it'll be interesting as the program evolve to see like, will different participating organizations like take different bets? Like, will one bet on the one-on-one experience, and another person bet on a teacher media experience, and maybe yet a third would bet on like a social group work experience? Or, you know, it'll be interesting to see how that develops, because I think they could go in lots of different ways.
Yeah, and I'm also fascinated by that. You know, if you're doing an in-classroom version, is what you're really trying to pinpoint is misconceptions that teachers can then pick up on, and it's more a kind of teacher-facing tool almost, and it's used diagnostically.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very different from
It's
setting out a learning pathway for a kid who might be at home, might be doing it unassisted.
Yeah, exactly.
And because I think all of the programs have to have schools involved, have to have teachers involved. It's not just co-design with government, with practitioners themselves. You know, will there be a kind of bias that emerges from teachers themselves as to how they would like these tools to...
There's this tension where you're like, well, actually, like, letting kids go completely at their own pace, it sounds great in principle, but then it's like insane if you're trying to manage that as a teacher. And so there's this very natural instinct as a teacher who's kind of like accountable for all the kids' learning to be like, hey, we have to keep the group together. But in some ways, you could almost imagine that like working against the opportunity of letting a kid go much faster, much slower based on their need. So it's like, I think it'd be a really interesting design space. But I am...
Yeah, and, you know, how do you check mastery for a kid that's going really fast?
Yeah.
You know, as a teacher, do you need to come back and really check it? Has this accelerated their learning? There's a bunch of really interesting design questions for education, not just for the kind of specific tool that flow from it.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm super excited that this is going on. So, I think we should both check back in. I think probably in the next month or two, we'll kind of know more about the teams that were selected and, you know, what projects might be pitching.
Yeah, and I understand from the people that government have been talking to that they really want a wide range of representatives. So not just people who are tech people who are very close to education already, but I think some people who, you know, might also bring more of that pure tech perspective. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. You're talking about design, like somebody who comes in with this is what the tech can actually do right now. How does that fit with what education needs? Yeah,
super cool.
It'll be good to see.
Well, thank you for
really cool.
Thank you for ushering me through the workings of UK government, and thanks for helping with the interview.
It was such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, talk to you soon, Hermione.